So Jim asked me to talk a little bit about where we're heading, having had a nice introduction from John on behalf of Chuck and Terry. And so I've been thinking about this. Actually, I've been thinking about this all the time. This is kind of what I spend most of my time doing, is thinking about where we're going, what's next. I really like that kind of stuff, so happy to do that. I wanted to mention first, quick thanks to Jim for making all this stuff possible. For those of you, Jim just announced his retirement coming up soon. For anybody worried that means that we're not going to have Jim around and Jim's influence here is going to wane, I think I will put your fears to rest. Jim's been retired as long as I've known him. I play that for a laugh, but there's a good side to that too, I think, and that's, Jim has, as long as I've known Jim, has always approached his job and his work as if he's retired. And in retirement, you get to do what you want to do, and you get to do what you think is right, and that's one of the things that I think I really admire the most about Jim. It's what allowed Jim to take a relatively simple job and turn it into something really great, and just all the witness what's been built over the last 25 years. And thanks to Jim for making that all possible. So thanks, Jim. Okay, so I'm going to start here with this vision for the future, really by going back to what the beginnings of this big effort are all about. And this vision that we have now is the same vision we've had since I started here in 95. The idea is that what we want to see is measures of ecological integrity fully integrated into California's natural resource management programs. And that California uses this information, not just uses it, but prioritizes it to make decisions and protect and restore our water bodies and watersheds. So that's really that's the ultimate goal. That's what all of this stuff is done for. This work has expanded to a vast number of people and institutions that have participated in one way or another in doing this. It's really quite a exciting community to work in. Over this sort of past and going into the future, I see our program having 3 stages or 3 phases, whatever you want to call them, as the program has matured and continues to mature into the future. The first one I describe as infrastructure development. So in the beginning, we were really focused on standardizing the way we did things and developing the core monitoring programs that Terry talked about. The second major phase is more focused on building better tools for using the data that come out of these programs. So we've got standard methods, collecting the data. How do we make better use of it? And so that's what we've been spending a lot of time on. And if you've gone to CABW meetings in the past, you've seen a lot of talks that relate to this aspect of the program. And where I think we are now, all of these things will continue to happen because they need to keep, refining and developing over time. But the third stage that I think we're in now is moving beyond some of these technical tools and implementing them, doing that final step of implementation. We'll talk about that too. So just to give you a little sense of what I mean by some of these. So in the first stage, we put a lot of effort into developing standard methods for collecting and measuring bioassessment data. And so this meant standardizing field protocols, standardizing the way that the taxonomy is done in the lab, standardizing data management and quality assurance, and also standardizing the tools you use for turning the species list that we get at the site into a score that relates to can tell you something about the condition of the site. The second big piece was what Terry talked about, development of our core monitoring programs. So he talked about EMAP and CMAP and PSA. And those are our main tools that main programs we have for monitoring the condition of streams throughout the state. The other one he mentioned was our reference program, which is a really powerful set of data from sites that have relatively low amounts of human activity in them that we use to do all kinds of things. But especially, it tells us, we use that information to tell us what we expect to see from the biology when the site is in good condition. And then the last couple big pieces of this infrastructure are advances. So we've got this, we put most of our work on benthic invertebrates and now benthic algae, a little bit of riparian vegetation. But ultimately, we'd like to know about more of the whole community that we see at sites. So there's additional work to be done there. And we've spent a lot of work on wadable streams and more recently on non-perennial streams. But we'd really like to be able to use this stuff in other water bodies as well. So that's an area that we need to continue to push on. So I gave a talk a couple of years ago I called The Expanding Universe of Bioassessment. And so what I just described for you is this, so you can visualize this big circle on the left. What you get from standardizing all this stuff is you get a really large set of data that is collected in a common way, and it's known quality, and you can now use this to encourage other people to do things the same way you are. And so we've built partnerships over the years with many different entities that collect this data. They're all collecting it the same way, and we now have a massive data engine that can be used to do all kinds of things. And so, as I said before, we have put a lot of work into that over the last probably 10 years or so. The new investments will be expanding the types of data that go into that core of our data sets. Now, from that core of data, we can produce all kinds of things. And so lots of people, when I show that slide of various partners that have been working on this, some of the things they do is they take the data that are in that the data sets that we've now got, and they turn that into tools that help us interpret what we're seeing and what we're understanding from that. So, these can be things like our CSCI or the algae scoring tool, but they could be things like our new habitat indices, new causal assessment tools, data that help us understand impacts from fire and drought and climate change. So all of those things are possible because we have this big data. So there's two big areas of work in this component, this stage 2. There's the technical tools and knowledge that we're enhancing and expanding, but also on the regulatory side. How do you set reasonable targets? How do you know when you're being reasonable? How do you know when you've made a difference? How do you know when you're not? So those things are included in this. So just a couple examples here to set up the next part. So I mentioned that there's regulatory and technical. On the regulatory side, some of the most interesting work that's happening right now is associated with the nutrient policy or the biostimulatory substance policy that the board is working on, and scientists at SWRCB and others have been doing a lot of the technical work for. Again, possible because we have this big data set to work with. But there's essentially what we're doing is using these ecological indicators to help set regulatory targets for various stressors in the environment. So in that case, it's nutrients, but it could also be hydrologic alteration, physical habitat integrity, and a host of other things. And so we're working on those at the same time. On the technical side, Terry mentioned that we now have new tools for causal assessment. This is the question of how do you determine, so if you've got biological impairment at a site, how do you know what happened? If you're going to fix that, you need to know why it's impaired. So there's a big effort to try to build tools that standardize how to do that. And that's made some progress too. Another big area is tools for looking at our condition data in the context of larger spatial scales, or larger spatial context. And you'll actually see a whole session this afternoon that on spatial analysis. Marcus Beck is leading up. So stay tuned for that. Lots of other investigations here. Two I'll highlight are metagenomics, or using genetic information to get more information out of what we collect at sites. And some exciting or interesting new tools for measuring assemblage structure called co-occurrence networks. I'll just mention briefly. Okay, so I borrowed my next set of slides from Susie. So Susie, I think I saw Susie. If I tweaked these a bit, so forgive me. But Susie has been working with others at SWRCB to start to push a little harder on the genetics tools that we have available. And so there's been a lot of exciting things happening there. I think the potential here is really great. So I want to highlight a couple things that's happening on that front. So the idea here is that there's really a potential for vastly increasing the amount of information that we obtain from each site. Right now, we look at benthic invertebrates and benthic algae based on traditional morphological approaches. And those data sets are really good. I mean, we've got very refined and mature look at the benthic invertebrates, especially. That's coming along nicely on the algal side as well. But really, that's only two of many assemblages of organisms that live in aquatic environments. We're not looking at fish. We're not looking at bacterial biome. There are lots of other things that we really should be looking at if we want to get a full sense of the health of these systems. So that's really what this is about. An initial pilot study that SWRCB is doing on this is looking at multi-trophic networks to start to do this. And the hope is that this will give us the ability to make some better inferences about an ecosystem's structure and potentially ecosystem function as well, which is a bit of a holy grail for us. For that project, they've been collecting about 100 samples from about 100 sites a year. And they're taking data from the paraphyton samples, the benthic algal samples that we normally take. So that's mostly where the focus of this is. It's on bacteria, archaea, and algae. There's a little bit of bugs thrown in there, but it's primarily focused on the others for now. Pilot work. Exciting stuff. Another example of a neat idea that's linked to this project comes from Levi Simons from USC. I first heard about this from Rafi back in the spring. He said, "Oh, there's this neat thing that you should hear about." So, we typically look at I come from the bug world. I'm used to, looking at the taxa list that comes out of sites and calculating metrics like the number of mayflies, the number of, the percent of predators, things like that. We have a whole suite of traditional things that we look at. What this does is we use what are called co-occurrence networks, or the relationships between the likelihood that different species are related or co-occur with each other. So this network, which comes from, is used widely throughout for all kinds of applications. So it's used looking at business relationships or like Facebook user relationships. It's all kinds of stuff. But you can apply it to really anything that has discrete entities. And so the neat thing about this is that it has the potential to show us patterns that we're not capturing in our traditional metrics. So, for example, the likelihood of species-species interactions and associations between those interactions or associations and different types of stress. So it's early days in this, but it's a good example of the kind of thing that's in our future. So again, neat thing about this is that lots of different types of metrics are possible here that aren't in our traditional. Okay, so I just want to echo a point that Terry made earlier. You know, we've got now, I think, a really exciting time. We've got this massive data set from many thousands of sites around the state, collected from all kinds of environments. We have lots of associated environmental data linked to it. So this gives really good opportunity for people to do all kinds of things with it. So the data are all free and available. We'll be more than happy to help make it accessible. Calvin here, this is what he lives for. Please use our data. So I want to close what I have to say, or sort of move into the last little bit here with a discussion of another component that we haven't really spent much time on. So we've made a lot of progress on these technical elements. You know, I think we've got a pretty refined data set. We continue to make improvements on making the data more accurate, more reliable, more interpretable, developing these new tools. But I ask myself, you know, if we continue to just head in this direction and continue to flesh this out, will we eventually achieve our vision? You know, the thing I talked about at the beginning, this idea that ecological data are really used to their full extent to make better ecological decisions or management decisions. I think the answer is no. I think there's a really important key piece missing here, and that is that we need to make bioassessment information easier for managers to use. And it's known about it, but we haven't really put much effort on this side of it. I think we need to. So if you think about this expanding universe model again, you know, the stuff on the left and the orange in the middle is where we spend most of our time. But those blue things are really what we're after. These are management endpoints. This is the use of that information to make on-the-ground decisions. And so those arrows, those last arrows connecting to those, are the pieces that we need to be developing. How do we get from those to those? And so that's an area that we put a fair amount of work into. So success in this area is going to require us to think at multiple spatial scales. You know, this is something I think this is common to ecologists, is to think this way, but it's not necessarily for all of the people that would like to be using this. So I think we need to be developing tools to help do that. You'll see a little bit of that in Marcus's special session on spatial data this afternoon. We're also working on this tools for developing frameworks for looking at data. Skip that there. My agency, Fish and Wildlife, is starting to do this more with looking at biological data. Melanie's going to give a talk this afternoon on some of the work that the department has been doing on its areas of conservation emphasis. Some really good stuff happening there. The other thing Terry mentioned, the Healthy Streams Partnership, the California Integrated Assessment of Watershed Health came out about 5 years ago, but the band's getting back together on that. The great thing about this is that this is a tool for a framework, rather, for putting together not just biological data, but all kinds of environmental data associated with it to give you a picture of how watersheds are doing, so you can use that and to communicate with other agencies that are having to make decisions about how to prioritize watersheds for different types of action, different types of policies, for example. So really exciting stuff happening there. And the last little bit is some work that we've partnered with Jeanette Howard with the Nature Conservancy. I think most of you know Jeanette. She's actually talked about this in previous years. Some really exciting uses of our data, taking the bug data and the fisheries data and some other things to map freshwater biodiversity in the state for the first time, and then take that data to make maps of high priority conservation areas. So if you want to conserve this freshwater biodiversity, these are the areas you need to go. So that's the idea there. Some really exciting stuff happening there. And so that's where I'll leave it. This is, this model really goes, you should have this image in your head of this vastly expanding universe. There's a ton of stuff that can come out of this, and I hope that you'll all join us and do it. So That's it. Thanks very much. And we're going to break. Or do you want?
And there's questions too.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you.
Perfectly clear.
Thanks, Pete.